So lately there's been a lot of talk in Warframe about tanking. What is tanking in Warframe? How can you do it? Is it effective at all? We'll try and answer some questions here. And we'll start off by kind of explaining tanking in Warframe, which is not like tanking in traditional MMOs or MOBAs, as you might be aware, outside of some gimmick situations. And that's because in these games, Warframes can't directly pull enemies to attack them. They cannot get aggro off of their teammates. A couple of exceptions to this are the Guardian Derision mod for your melee weapons, which will make enemies attempt to attack you while blocking, but at a very short range. And the Guardian Armor Augment for Chroma, which absorbs damage dealt to allies within a certain range and transfers it to Chroma instead. Beyond that, the Warframes are generally stuck just kind of trying to throw themselves in front and hoping that the enemies shoot at them and that their teammates are keeping themselves relatively out of harm's way. Now, there are a few styles of tanking in Warframe, so we'll start out with the most simple and basic one, health tanking. Kind of what it says on the tin. You rely on your health to survive, but also your armor. That's the tricky part of health tanking. As of the time of recording of this video, there is only one pure health tank in the game, and that is Aneros. He's a big block of health and some armor. He can turn invulnerable, technically meaning he's not even pure in that strictest sense, but he's the job there. So the big Achilles heels of health tanking is armor. You can see on the screen there, fairly large amounts of armor only go up to 90 or at kind of pushing it 95%. That ultimately is a lot. You can survive most of the game with that as long as you're smart and playing smart, but it will fall off eventually as you get higher and higher and higher if you're into that kind of stuff. So one common problem with health tanks is they have the health, but they don't have very good base armor, and modding multiplies off the base armor. So you often see arcanes and mods like the ones on the screen right now. They're used to add large amounts of valuable absolute armor to the frame regardless of their base to push that just the tiniest bit higher. Now you do occasionally also get the opposite problem. It's less common, but Valkyr is one example. Hydroid's Vulnerability gives him a ton of armor, but he doesn't have very good health. And again, mods are only going to adjust that base health for you. It's not going to give you gigantic, huge increases. So there are a couple of ways to get extra health. You can have a Chroma or a Wisp following you around, but not everyone has that convenience. So there's also the Arcane Blessing and the Topaz shards when you kill enemies with blast damage. There is also the blue shards, but if you're dealing blast damage, the orange shard is always going to give you a higher final amount. So now let's jump on to something that many health tanks also use, which is damage reduction. Now, damage reduction is also at its base not terribly difficult to understand. You have 90% damage reduction, you take 90% less damage. Means you basically have 10% as much health. The difference between damage reduction and damage reduction from armor is damage reduction applies to health and shields, and a couple of other weird things that we're not going to get into in the baseline of this video. Basically, with damage reduction, it almost always comes from abilities. The one exception is the adaptation mod, which gives you a little bit of damage reduction to specific damage types. It's dangerous to rely on that one because one, it only actually kind of averages out around 70% most of the time, and two, it's only against the damage type. So if you get an Xmas unit who just rocks up with a damage type that you aren't being dealt with, he will just come and hit you for the full amount. Another popular sort of mod set for certain frames is the Aviator, Aerodynamic, and Boreal mods, all of which just give you damage reduction while airborne. And kind of lastly, but not leastly, is the rolling. Rolling gives you about 30% damage reduction while you're rolling. So if you see a big hit coming, try and roll through it. Past that, there's really all damage reduction comes from abilities. So the biggest con of damage reduction is often that you have to keep an eye on your durations and your energy. Kind of can get a little micromanagey. If you're watching the footage in the back here and not just listening to this audio only, you'll notice I have to continuously kind of recast the link and the blessing on Trinity there. Same thing, Nidus has to constantly keep an enemy linked to him to keep his damage reduction. There's other examples as well, more than I can comfortably go through without this video being like 2 hours long. So that's damage reduction. The biggest thing, and with damage reduction, its kind of major advantage is you can stack multiple layers of damage reduction, including your armor in terms of your health. That then gives you, if you stack 90% damage reduction, you get another 90%. It's not 180% because that would be nonsense. But it becomes 90, then you take 90 of the leftover, which is then 9 out of that last 10%. You get 99% damage reduction. Throw on another 70%, you got 99.7%. Throw on another 30% because you're rolling from that, and you got 99.98%. And you can start, if you get enough of these stacked together, you can literally multiply your damage up into your, not your damage, your effective health up into the millions. And moving on from damage reduction now, we'll talk about shields, everyone's favorite. We'll start with shield tanking, which is a little different from shield. So shield tanking is also pretty easy to understand. Get a whole pile of shields. Get some way to regenerate them quickly, either with mods or abilities or arcanes, and that is your health that takes the hits and that regenerates semi-constantly, or you can force it to regenerate with abilities and things like that. One noticeable thing about shields is after a few patches in the last couple of years, they all have 50% damage reduction. So the number of shields you can actually have is basically twice what the screen tells you, and I don't know why they did it that way. There are a couple of frames that use their shields for abilities, and maybe they didn't want to redo the math on those, so they just give the shields 50% instead of doubling them. It's confusing math-wise, but if you're not too invested in the math, don't worry about it. Just more shields is better. The biggest one is if you got something that's on the fence between health and armor, or health and shields, and you're not sure what to invest in. That's where you get into a little bit of tricky stuff where you might need to do that math, but don't worry too much about it. Feel free to ask down in the comments if you really want a recommendation for that. Shield tanking is generally not popular, not for any special reason. It's relatively the same. You can stick damage reduction on it, and it's just as good as health. It has that built-in damage reduction already, which is the same as 300 armor on health. The only real problem shields do have is Toxin, much like with enemies, Toxin ignores shields completely, and not just Toxin procs, any form of Toxin damage. That said, keep away from the Toxin Xmas, watch out for the Nox, and stay away from those infested toxic clouds, and you should be all set in terms of that. You may also want to watch out for magnets if you are relying on passive shield recharge rather. Manual shield recharge, where you can just start it by doing whatever ability is going to do that for you. Otherwise, magnetic procs can be very detrimental to the speed at which your shields recharge. So essentially, if you have someone like Caliban on the screen here, he's just going to constantly get his shields buffed up by his little pets running around, and he'll basically be sitting at 3,000 shields and can walk through a pretty heavy firestorm with that. If you do have mods on him, such as the Augur set or the Brief Respite mod, he'll also recharge his shields every time he casts an ability and get them moving again. And you have similar options across a number of frames. Volt with an augment, Mag just uses her 3 and 4, can both restore shields. Chroma's blue element, different things like that. Hildren's Pillage is a very popular one as well. Hildren is a shield tank, but also one you want to be kind of careful about because you're spending your energy on the shields too, so you gotta watch out that you're not just pulling your health down essentially to cast spells. Now we're gonna move on to shield gating, which is a different thing. So shield gating is a mechanic that was introduced essentially to prevent people from getting one shot, because it used to be you could lose all your shields and all your health at once if something hit you hard enough. And Warframe's not the best at encounter design or enemy visibility, so that was kind of a common thing with like corpus shotgunners and bombards and stuff just hitting you because they don't really stand out for the other enemies, or they spawned around a corner or some nonsense. Shield gating as a tanking method sprung up from, I guess you could call it exploiting that mechanic. D's kind of canonized it, so I guess it's not really an exploit, but basically with shield gating, what you do is when your shield hits its 0 point, you get a window of invulnerability that's based on how much your shields were charged up since the last time you hit your 0 shield point. So you do still need a decent amount of shields if you want to get really long shield gates and invulnerability periods. And basically the idea is you let your shields drop down, and then you'll either use an ability or something to charge them back up, or try and equip some mods and stuff to try and charge them back up in the meantime, possibly including giving yourself another vulnerability window with an iframe ability or the rolling guard mod, that your shields will charge back up enough that they will recover the invulnerability period again, long enough to recharge again. Effectively, if you can get it going correctly and do it properly. I'm not the best at it. It's way too much micromanaging for me, so I don't even really have a shield gating focused build. If you are heavily into this, I would encourage looking for some other guides out there, particularly from people who play Endless Endurance, because they have a lot more to say on the subject. Basically, you can use it kind of normally, and you can mix it in with other things. You don't have to dedicate the whole build to it. You just need one mod or one ability that's going to give you shields back somehow. That can be the Brief Respite mod or the Augur mods or the helmet thing on Heroes Condemn, which is what I'm using in the background here on Hero himself. And then if you are in trouble, you can whip that down and usually get yourself at least a second or so of invulnerability. Usually if you are going to go into the full shield gating mod, you will want to install the mod called Catalyzing Shields, which reduces the overall shield amount you need, but also hard locks the duration of the invulnerability. Now, enough of that. We're going to move on to the newest kit on the block, which is Overgard. So I said Overguard's new, though technically they retconned a couple of abilities to be Overguard based, including Rhino's Iron Skin and Frost's Icy Avalanche. Rhino being our test subject here today in the background. Overgard, basically, you can only get it, for the most part, from a Warframe who has an Overgard ability, and any abilities that will grant Overgard that are in the helmet system do not grant Overgard when helmet. So already your options are limited to Rhino, Calervo, Dante, Frost, Styanax, or Ember. There is an Arcane for secondary guns as well, but that requires you to steal Overgard from enemies. Which also applies to Nyx, who has a similar ability. And outside of a few specific special mission modifiers, you generally won't get enough Overgard for that to be terribly consistent. And if you do, it's going to be getting knocked down as fast as you're getting it, because of how much you can get and how much you can get per hit, and the enemies, how much the enemies will have. Nonetheless, Overgard is this cute little white or light blue thing that goes over top of your health and shields and has a couple of unique effects. I guess we'll start with the bad. The bad about Overgard is that 14,000 or 20,000 or 60,000 or whatever of white health is exactly what it says on the tin. There is no effective health when you're talking about Overgard. It does not benefit from armor. It does not benefit from any other form of damage reduction. That does mean that while Dante and Rhino and some of them can throw up some impressive numbers, it's quite possible that other Warframes using damage reduction in particular are going to have massively higher effective hit points than what they seem to be, and way over those Overgard amounts. The other part of Overgard is that it gives you status immunity. That's probably the biggest use of it compared to just adding conventional health to yourself, because it just blocks being lit on fire, being hit with viral procs, having your armor corroded, having your energy drained by magnets, and all those other fun things. Also getting knocked down. If you're running an Overgard frame, you do not need Prime Sure-Footed. I'm a terrible YouTuber, I know. But anyways, yeah, don't put that on the build that's going to be running Overgard, because you don't need it. One fun fact is, around the 1999 patch, or the Tech Rod Encore patch, staggers and something I would best characterize as a stun and bounces do go through both Prime Sure-Footed and the Overguard status immunity when they did not previously. So some of those attacks will still disrupt you, they just won't knock you down for like a couple of seconds. Not too much to say about Overguard. The methods of gaining it vary slightly, and would have to be discussed on a frame-by-frame basis. For the most part, it is very easy to put the Overguard back up if it gets knocked down, and often includes an invulnerable period. You can also use the stuff we talked about in shield gating to make sure when you're casting your ability to put your Overguard back on, you are invulnerable. And there's not too much else to say about Overguard. If you have Dante, Styanax, or Frost around, they'll give it to you. They do the whole team. If you're Rhino or Calervo, you'll just put your own on. Embers requires an augment for her third ability called Healing Flame to gain Overguard. Moving on from that, we'll dive into a much more complicated one, which is evasion tanks. So I wrestled with whether to even mention evasion tanks, because there's really only two of them in the game. One is Zaku and one's Titania. There are ways to get small amounts of evasion from the Aviator mod and the Karnus mod set. And the Karnus mod set very temporarily, but not enough to really matter. There is passive evasion. The faster you are moving and the more parkour you are doing, you will build up a passive evasion meter as well. But Titania and Zaku are really the only ones who can push it to significant amounts due to be having access to buffs to it with their abilities. What does evasion do? So evasion, like damage reduction, is a percentage chance. However, it's a chance to not get hit. And that's where I kind of wrestled a bit including it, because you could make an argument I should be including invisibility and crowd control at that point. But since it is kind of a passive defensive layer and not, an active ability or whatever you want to call a stealth mode, basically you run through the halls, you can kind of see it on screen here. Enemies are shooting at me, but they just don't hit me, despite the fact that they're hit scanners and should be ripping me up like chain gunners from Doom. Shout out if you played the original Doom and knew that the first or second enemy is one of the most dangerous ones in the game. There's not too much you really do with evasion. You keep it up and you cross your fingers and hope that people don't hit you. The problem is that the best evasion methods, they can still hit you. For one, there are AoE attacks and things that are not directed at you, such as Aximus shockwaves, that you'll have to avoid manually. Zaku does get a passive that kind of helps her out with that. And things like that, they can be shooting at your companions, they can be shooting at your sentinel, all that sorts of fun stuff, and then your evasion means nothing because they're not aiming at you. You can't evade it. Basically, the other problem is 99% evasions, if you can get it, means 1% of the time you're still going to get hit, and that can be a lot of damage. Meaning that, and this is shared with many games that have evasion traits. I know it was a weird thing in Path of Exile 1 that I won't get into right now, where basically you're absolutely fine until you're not, and then you're dead. That dead may have other ways to mitigate it, and I would certainly encourage them, but I wouldn't fully rely on it. Again, you also can't really mod for it significantly in any way, so it's very tough to build anything. You are just generally relying on what your frame brought to the table. Moving on from that, we'll get into something that is very reliable, and which you've probably all been waiting for and wondering why the hell I haven't mentioned it yet, which is invulnerability. And as hot button topics go, invulnerability sure is one right now. So yeah, Brain Dead Revenant, remember that? Run into that? He's an obvious one. Valkyr's number 4, Nyx's number 4, particularly if you use an augment to let you move properly. That's going to be your main culprits. Hydroid used to have some as well, but they took that away. Other frames do have invulnerability, but it's generally for short periods while they're doing dashes and things like that. Corvex now has a variation of it as well on one of his augments. So invulnerability is obviously the supreme defense. You are straight up cannot be hurt. Basically, your only things that are going to damage you are if you lose your ability to cast your invulnerability when it inevitably runs out, or if be due to energy or being nullified or different things like that, or that really annoying acolyte violence that likes to run around with a silence field on you. And then you can go down pretty easily because most of the people who are building invulnerable frames don't give them a backup plan. I've lost track of how many times I've seen dead revenants as a result of nullifiers. There might even be one in this clip. Also, important thing if you are checking Revenant, this is not a Revenant video, but his invulnerability doesn't work against environmental stuff, so stuff like traps and void bursts and railjack and things like that will still hurt him. As far as I'm aware, it's not supposed to kill him, it's only supposed to knock him down to 2 health, but if you then get your stacks depleted or you get nullified, you're in severe trouble if you're running around with 2 health. Just one to be careful for there. There's not a whole lot to be said about invulnerability as a tanking method. You cast it, you're invulnerable. You have to manage a timer in a lot of cases, or manage energy. More, I guess it's more the common thing. People run out of energy and then they're just not invulnerable and then they die. While we're here, is invulnerability healthy for the game? God, no. If DE ever intends to make actual challenges, they basically have to do something to shut down anyone who can just sit in invulnerability for the entire mission. Which is the 4 I just mentioned, and they're already doing it to Valkyr. They already took it away from Hydroid. Your opinions on the Undertow as a general ability aside, he was able to stay invulnerable indefinitely. And who was the other one? Nyx. They technically gave Nyx the ability to do it better, but that may get pulled back or may have its energy cost jumped around as well. If you can get it though, invulnerability is the best defense. Like, that's not anything that can really be debated. The one caveat is if you get nullified out of your invulnerability, which cannot be done to your health shields or Overgard. Those don't get nullified, even if you do get silenced and things like that. And just generally, if you're gonna put your eggs in the invulnerability basket, you probably want to have at least a mild backup plan. Shield gating, for instance, if you're going to try and do that part there. Let me know down in the comments if you figured out a little Easter egg that's going on in this video, if you've been watching the background as well. Of course, there are other esoteric ways of tanking, so feel free to drop your best suggestions down below about other strange things. And of course, the best combination is to use more than one method. If you do want to see more, including frame guides that might show you some of those combined methods, remember to drop a like and subscribe to the channel. We got more coming out pretty much every week, and we'll see you then. Until then, enjoy yourself.